Okay, the next item of business is a debate on motion 17539 in the name of Angus Robertson on Scotland in today's Europe. I'd invite members wishing to participate to press the request to speak buttons now on as soon as possible, and I call on Angus Robertson to speak to and move the motion. Cabinet Secretary, around 12 minutes.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. This year we mark 75 years since the signing of the Schuman Declaration on the 9th of May 1950. Last Friday, I and others in this chamber celebrated Europe Day and the shared values that underpin the European project. Poignantly, last week we also marked 80 years since VE Day on the 8th of May 1945 and the liberation of Europe by the Allied forces that ended the Second World War in Europe. And I had the privilege to mark the day at a memorial service at Westminster Abbey in London on behalf of the Scottish Government. Out of the ashes of the Second World War grew renewed ideas about international unity and cooperation between nations, about building trust and basing the world order on the rule of law. One of these ideas was the European coal and steel community that paved the way for the European Union of today. The 6 original signatories of the Schuman Declaration agreed to put the production of key defence materials under common control. Trust was built through transparency and, ultimately, economic interdependence. Erstwhile bitter rivals became partners, and lasting peace and prosperity became a reality between members of the European Union. Of course.
Alex Cole-Hamilton.
I'm very grateful to the Cabinet Secretary for taking my intervention, and I should say that the Liberal Democrats will be supporting the government motion tonight. He's very right to start with the coal and steel community. It was such that the nations of Europe could never again build a war machine without others being aware of that. Does he recognise that in the straitened times that we find ourselves with global strife and the threat of war, certainly existent war on continental Europe, our relationship with Europe has never been more important?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, firstly, can I thank the Liberal Democrats for supporting the government's motion, which has been drafted in a way that and has received welcome from other parties, and I think that's a good thing. I think Mr Cole-Hamilton's raising of defence and security issues is also relevant for all of us. We have literally tens of thousands of Ukrainian refugees in Scotland, and the Scottish Government supports the United Kingdom Government's interventions in helping to secure a just peace for Ukraine. And as I'll come on to later in my speech, we're approaching a UK-EU summit next week. Defence and security forms an important part of those discussions, and we're supportive of the UK Government's position in relation to those discussions. But there are other issues where things are perhaps a little bit more challenging, and I'll come on to that later, and if he would wish to intervene on me at that stage, I'd be happy to take an intervention on that. On the ideals that led to the founding of the European Economic Community and then the European Union, and at the forefront of our minds, I hope the forefront of the UK Government's minds as well, when on Monday the Prime Minister will meet the President of the European Commission and the European Council for what the UK ministers call a reset summit on UK-EU relations. Tragically, that summit takes place as war has again returned to our continent. Our international institutions are under threat, the far right is rising across the globe, and many people sense that we live in an increasingly divided and polarised world. On Sunday, I chaired a Festival of Europe Scotland event held by the Scottish Council on Global Affairs, which asked what in the world lies ahead beyond the UK and beyond the European Union. It was a fascinating discussion and a sobering one about the challenges that we are living through at the moment, but also about how to use these times to offer hope and optimism for the future. We've long known that the major challenges of today, such as humanitarian emergencies, climate change, resource insecurity, can only be addressed by working together as a global community. And the Scottish Government, of course, supports closer partnership between the UK and the European Union on defence and security challenges, including our shared and unwavering support for Ukraine and condemnation of Russia and the threat that it poses, which we cannot underestimate. Global instability, and in particular the ongoing threat of a trade war, is having economic impacts everywhere, including here in Scotland and the rest of the UK. And happy to give way to Patrick Harvie.
Patrick Harvie.
I'm very grateful to the Cabinet Secretary, and I agree with the sentiment he's expressing. But does he agree that that sentiment would be given fuller expression if the UK and the EU were to agree that Russian fossil fuel trading must be included in the sanctions regime. There is a company based in Glasgow still making profit from trading Russian LNG, and this is within the rules under the current sanctions regime. Surely that kind of lethal business should be added to the sanctions.
Cabinet Secretary.
I certainly agree that sanctions should be respected, and any evidence of companies that are trying to get round them needs to be brought to light. And from a sedentary position, Mr Harvey asked me whether I would support sanctions being strengthened. The answer is simple. The answer is yes, I do. Moving on, Presiding Officer, and to borrow from the former German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, who said that we are living through a Zeitenwende, a turning point, a crossroads. But we have been here before, relatively recently in our lifetimes. In 1989, with the fall of the Berlin Wall, change was underway. But we have to be honest, this was a time of great hope and opportunities, but also of deep uncertainty about the post-Cold War future in Europe and internationally. The experiences of the previous decades created fear of what the reaction of the communist dominoes falling in Eastern Europe would be and what it would mean for the world. Once the dust settled, great challenges lay ahead in Europe to support the development of democracy in a great number of different countries, to rebuild and transform economies, and to make European neighbours cut off from the European integration process partners and ultimately ready for them to become EU members. The European project too evolved greatly during this time. In 1992, the EU as we know it today was founded through the Maastricht Treaty. In 2004, enlargement marked a watershed moment for post-1989 Europe, with 10 new members joining the EU, followed by several more since. Presiding Officer, I'd like now to turn to the contribution from people of those European accession states, and indeed all those from overseas who have chosen to settle here in Scotland and have made Scotland their home. Firstly, if he doesn't mind, I want to make a bit more progress. In talking about people who have come to Scotland from the rest of the European Union and the rest of the world, I think it's important that we understand and we respect that these are, of course, people. That is their defining characteristic, not migration or statistics, but people with the same dreams and aspirations as everybody else. They deserve to be treated with the same dignity and respect as anyone else. And back in 2005, the then First Minister and Scottish Labour leader said this, and I quote, "The way to preserve schools and hospital and services in this country, and the way to have a strong economy in the years to come, is to have more fresh talent in this country." Commendably, Jack McConnell also said, "Immigration went beyond the economic benefits, vital though those are for Scotland. It's about our values and it's about our place in the world," he said. And he was right. But how far Labour has fallen since then. Instead of that hopeful, optimistic, welcoming, inclusive message, on Monday the Prime Minister engaged in ugly, damaging and disgraceful rhetoric. Instead of standing up to the far right, he chose to lie down in front of Nigel Farage. For Keir Starmer to use words such as squalid, strangers, and describing those who have come to the UK as being part of a lab experiment truly was a new low for Labour. Presiding Officer, let me reassure all of those from Europe and beyond who have made Scotland their home and who may well be feeling bruised and uncertain today. The Scottish Government values what you do. Your contribution to our health service, your contribution to our care homes, your contribution to our businesses and our communities is immense. You are part of us, you will always be welcome, and we thank you for making Scotland your home. Presiding Officer, freedom of movement has been one of the European Union's greatest achievements. The opportunity for people in Scotland to live, to love, to work in 27 other countries should have been celebrated, not denigrated. Like all great partnerships, the EU will of course have its moment of discussion and disagreement. But again, like all good relationships, it has established mechanisms to come to agreements and make it work. When the EU's founding values such as equality, democracy and the rule of law can seem under threat even from some within the Union, now is the time to proclaim those values even more loudly. That is why last week...
Stephen Kerr.
I'm grateful to the Cabinet Secretary for giving way, and I wanted to intervene earlier when he was talking about the forthcoming UK-EU summit in London. And he will have seen, as I saw, this morning's front page of the Financial Times, which disclosed an internal EU document that sets out some terms and conditions. Does he think it's right that the EU should conditionalise security cooperation, particularly given the things he has said in his speech about the situation on the continent of Europe? Does he think that the EU should conditionalise cooperation on security on the basis of unlimited, far-reaching access to UK fishing waters?
Cabinet Secretary,
I'll come specifically onto that in a moment, and indeed in my summing up, Mr Kerr. So I will be answering in full in the course of this afternoon's debate for reasons that will become obvious. Last week we marked Europe Day to remember the circumstances in which great institutions were founded and to recall the ideas about international unity and cooperation between nations, that we might learn the lessons of the past, basing the world order on the rule of law and about building trust over division. We need these institutions to find common ground, to tackle challenges, working together and, above all, to rebuild trust, a common good that is eroding globally today. Now, nearly 9 years ago, the Scottish people overwhelmingly voted to remain in the European Union, while the UK made the regrettable choice to leave. Scotland stands steadfast behind the European idea and project, the founding principles of what is today the European Union, and we uphold our shared values. Scotland is a proud European nation with a strong internationalist tradition and outlook. Scottish people's vote nearly 9 years ago and this government's commitment since then leaves no doubt that Scotland's place is in the EU and that we're committed to rejoin the EU as an independent member state. We welcome and support the UK government's intent to seek improved relations with the EU. We have tirelessly called for better relations. If the United Kingdom government is serious about economic growth, it would drop its red lines and get back into the single market and to the customs union. There are many areas in which a closer partnership with the EU could at least lessen the damage of Brexit. So, in advance, yes, I'm happy to give way to Claire Adamson.
Claire Adamson.
Thank you very much, Cabinet Secretary. In your discussions with the UK Government, has there been any detail about an agreement sought involving the potential fisheries arrangements, a policy that is devolved to this Parliament?
Always through the Chair. Cabinet Secretary.
I can confirm to Claire Adamson and to the Parliament, no. The United Kingdom Government has had no detailed discussion with the Scottish Government, the Northern Irish Government or the Welsh Government on that issue, which is, of course, devolved. More than that, the interministerial group which would discuss environment, fish and rural affairs issues, the EFRA interministerial group, has been cancelled the last 3 times. The last time with only 2 hours' notice given. I'll give way to Mr Bibby. He might be able to explain that.
Neil Bibby.
Well, I will explain to the Cabinet Secretary that if we rejoin the EU as his position, we'd be rejoining the Common Fisheries Policy, Mr Robertson. But on the issue of economic growth that he mentioned, will he welcome the fact that the UK in the first 3 months of this year is the fastest growing economy in the G7? Cabinet Secretary.
Of course, I always welcome economic growth, but what I won't welcome is holding discussions on behalf of this Parliament, on behalf of this government in this country, and not involving its institutions. The European Union is currently sharing text of the potential outcomes of next week's discussions with its member states. The UK government is not doing so with devolved administration. There's few days for that to be changed. Perhaps Mr Bibby will pick up the phone to speak to his colleagues in London and ask why not. In advance of the Leaders' Summit on Monday in London, we have outlined our position in recent publications on a youth mobility agreement, on Erasmus+, on Creative Europe, on closer energy and climate cooperation, on core needs for a veterinary food and drink agreement with the European Union, and of course, we strongly support closer working with EU partners on defence and security. At all times during the build-up to the summit, we have offered to be constructive partners with the UK government. And while a number of meetings have taken place, it is unacceptable that today, just a few days from the summit, no draft text has been shared with ourselves or indeed other devolved governments. This is in stark contrast to the way the EU treats its member states. I give way to Mr Cole-Hamilton, who was seeking to intervene.
Alex Cole-Hamilton.
I'm very grateful indeed for the Cabinet Secretary taking my intervention. He kindly invited me to do so at this stage in his remarks, and I'm gratified to hear that a number of the clauses in the Liberal Democrat amendment that was not selected for debate around an EU youth mobility scheme, a comprehensive defence pact, and removal of red lines that stop us getting back into the customs union are all part of his government's priorities.
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, indeed they are, and I think there is largely a consensus, perhaps. I'm not entirely sure what the position on the Scottish Conservative Party on measures which would boost our economy, which would support our care sector, which would support our National Health Service, which would give young people the opportunity to live and work throughout Europe, and indeed European continental young people coming to this country too. So there is a shared agenda. I think there's a majority in this Parliament for it. I hope the UK Government is listening, and I hope, with some days to go, that it chooses to conduct its business with devolved administrations around the UK with the same dignity and respect that the European Union does for its member states. Presiding Officer, let me finish by reiterating this core point. The best relationship Scotland and the UK can have with the EU will always be as full member states of the European Union. That's why we hope Scotland can look forward to in the future. That's why I move the motion in my name.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. I now call on Stephen Kerr to speak to and move Amendment 17539.4. A generous 8 minutes, Mr Kerr.
And I move the amendment in my name, Deputy Presiding Officer. I don't think the Cabinet Secretary actually answered the question I asked in my intervention. I'm happy for him to intervene on me to answer that question. Does he think it's right that the European Union is making security cooperation contingent on access, long-term access, to UK fishing waters? He didn't answer that question, and maybe he would like to take a moment to do so.
Cabinet Secretary.
Happy to take the intervention. No, I would not be pleased to see a conditionality on defence and security with any other consideration. I believe defence and security serves us all. That should be a key priority. But I would hope that he recognises that it is a hugely deficient situation that with only, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, 3 days to go until the summit meeting in London, where he's able to read about these issues on the front page of UK newspapers. Government ministers in Edinburgh, in Cardiff and Northern Ireland have not been informed by the UK Government about any of these detailed discussions.
Stephen Kerr, and I'll give you the time back.
The relationship between the Scottish Government and the UK Government, this is a long-running story. The Labour Party thought in taking government they could reset the relationship with the Scottish Government. The Scottish Government were full of similar sentiments. I think perhaps he has the answer to the question he's asking at his own fingertips. But let me be absolutely clear. I actually agree with the Cabinet Secretary. It is wrong, plain wrong, for the European Union to make security cooperation conditional on anything, such as the nature of the threat that we face on our shared continent. There should be no conditionality to us working together to thwart the efforts of Vladimir Putin or anyone else who would seek to undermine the European nation-states that should be working together in what Keir Starmer, I think, has rightly called a coalition of the willing. But where are we this afternoon, on this wonderful Thursday afternoon? Here we are again, packed chamber, I can see. This Parliament being asked again to indulge the SNP's constitutional obsession, and we've already had a good intro to that from the Cabinet Secretary, as if the solution to Scotland's economic challenges is always the same. Break up the UK, rejoin the EU, and pretend that sovereignty is a burden rather than a prize. And Angus Robertson's motion, and I hope he will forgive me for saying so, but he may even take this as a compliment, it looks like it could have been written in Brussels, because it calls on the UK to abandon the basic pillars of our post-Brexit independence, to drop the so-called red lines of leaving the single market, the customs union, and to re-adopt freedom of movement. But those aren't just red lines. They are the democratic instructions of the British people. We didn't vote to leave the EU in name only. We voted to take back control of our laws, our borders, our trade policy, our money. And that's what we've done. And in the last few days, we have seen the evidence of the fruits of an independent trade policy, something that Angus Robertson and the SNP would freely and willingly give up. But that is an advantage, a benefit that has come about because we left the European Union. And since Brexit, the United Kingdom has signed over 70 trade deals. We joined the CPTPP. We're negotiating the detail of free trade agreements with India and the United States. And particularly, by the way, the trade deal with India has been widely welcomed, especially by the Scotch whisky industry, because behind that deal there will be prosperity for that sector and jobs in some of the most remote parts of Scotland. That is one aspect, that's one sector that can take advantage of trade between the United Kingdom and, for example, India and the United States. But there are others as well. This is, in effect, Brexit delivering. And yet now, amid this motion, and in the light of today's front-page story in the Financial Times, we must face a new risk. Not just the SNP's fantasy of rejoining the EU, but the Labour's quiet attempt to reverse Brexit by stealth. The FT reports that a so-called reset, and by the way, we all know the European Union do not like the use of the word reset. I think that was made clear to some of our parliamentary colleagues when they visited as a committee Brussels. They didn't like the word reset, but the Labour government wanted a reset of UK-EU relations is being driven by EU demands for British concessions on fishing rights and youth mobility, because Brussels wants long-term access to UK fishing waters. The Scottish Conservatives will stand with Scotland's fishermen, and we refute the demands of the European Union for those concessions, because they are not the way that these matters have been done in the past, and they should not be the way that they will be done in the future. And Brussels also wants our students, our government here in Edinburgh, to subsidise their students. They want their students to be able to get cheap access to the United Kingdom's universities, and crucially, it wants a role for the European Court of Justice in overseeing UK compliance to any future agreement that is discussed starting on Monday. Let's be in no doubt about what this means. This is not a partnership of equals. It's a creeping return to EU control, and Labour seems only too ready to sign us up to it behind closed doors, because there is talk of a dynamic alignment, which is code for accepting new EU laws without having a say in those EU laws. There's talk of a youth mobility scheme, but with permanent obligations and no clear limits. There are whispers of regulatory harmonisation in return for marginal gains in trade. And, Presiding Officer, that's not cooperation, that's capitulation. And the British people did not vote for Brexit, only to have it reinterpreted in secret summits and in quiet deals. The Labour leader may claim he's not interested in the battles of the past, but if he trades away our fishing grounds, our borders, our legal autonomy, he's not just fighting yesterday's battles, he's surrendering them. Meanwhile, of course, the SNP cheers him on, because anything that weakens the United Kingdom suits their separatist agenda. And we've heard enough grievance just in the opening statement by the Cabinet Secretary, surely to convince the neutral observer that that is the intention of the SNP and government here at Holyrood. But let's be clear, this isn't about strengthening. Of course I will.
Douglas Lumsden.
I thank Stephen Kerr for taking the intervention. Does he agree with me that this is not an obsession about Europe by the SNP? This is just an obsession with independence coming through. They would use any topic to further their cause of independence, whether that's Brexit, whether it's a pandemic, war in Ukraine, or even Nigel Farage. They will use anything to try and get their way, and they never will.
Stephen Kerr.
Of course, Douglas Lumsden's correct. Every single thing that happens, anything they see on the 6 o'clock news, becomes a reason for breaking up the United Kingdom, becomes an excuse for another referendum. So let's be clear, this is not for the SNP about strengthening ties with Europe as much as it's about weakening the bonds of Britain. And all of it comes wrapped, I think, in a staggering hypocrisy. The motion speaks of closer climate cooperation, while the SNP government has no energy strategy, blocks nuclear, sabotages oil and gas, and presides over wind farm developments that are collapsing under its own broken planning regime. It talks of food and drink agreements, but it's the United Kingdom government, not the EU, that's out there fighting for Scottish exports. It's UK trade deals that are promoting Scotch whisky, Scottish salmon, and our fantastic food and drink sector around the world. And it laments that devolved governments haven't seen the draft EU summit text, but the Financial Times has, and they reveal that the EU are back to their usual ways of doing business. So, Deputy Presiding Officer, let's not pretend the SNP would use that information if they even had access to it, which they apparently don't, in good faith. They don't want a good deal for Britain. They want a bad deal, because they want, in fact, they exist politically on a diet of division and grievance, and that is entirely why we're taking up this time, this Thursday afternoon in this Parliament, because it's another opportunity for them to fester that grievance. Presiding Officer, I know that Brexit is not a finished job, but the answer is not to go backwards. The answer is to defend and deepen our sovereignty, to use our freedoms to grow enterprise, to cut red tape and secure the best deals for the UK on our terms. We cannot afford to drift back under Brussels' orbit by stealth, nor can we allow an unelected European court to stand above our Parliament, our judges and our voters. Scotland's future is not in surrendering our sovereignty to the EU or in surrendering our prosperity to nationalist ideology. It is in standing proud as part of a strong, global trading, forward-looking United Kingdom. This Parliament should reject this motion. It should reject the SNP's dream of dependency, and it should reject Labour's quiet sellout of Brexit. Let us instead build a confident Scotland at the heart of a sovereign United Kingdom, looking not to Brussels, but to the rest of the world.
Thank you. Just to advise the Chamber, at this stage there is a little time in hand, therefore members will get the time back for any interventions. And at this point I'll call Neil Bibby to speak to and move Amendment 17539.1 around 6 minutes. Mr Bibby.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. When Anas Sarwar responded to the SNP's latest programme for government last week, he asked, "Is that it?" And it was an important question because after nearly 2 decades of SNP rule in Scotland, the legislative programme was a weak and meagre one. It was symbolic of the SNP's term in office, all spin and no substance, a failure to meet the needs of the people of Scotland and concentrate on what it is responsible for. And here we are just a week later with a Scottish Government debate on Scotland's place in today's Europe, when we instead should be debating what's happening in today's Scotland. I'm content from time to time to debate important international issues, as we did so relatively recently. And of course it is right for the Constitution, Europe, External Affairs and Culture Committee to consider in detail issues relating to the Trade and Cooperation Agreement with the European Union. But this debate today is about deflection, and it is about grandstanding ahead of the important UK-EU summit on Monday. Presiding Officer, there is a growing disconnect between the Scottish people and Scottish politics, and it is because this government and this place isn't doing its job. We could be here debating the First Minister's inadequate plans for new GP appointments. We could be discussing the challenges facing our education sector, although that would rely on the Cabinet Secretary for Education turning up. Or we could be discussing a plan to solve our housing emergency. But these issues are sidelined in favour of SNP grandstanding on Europe. From the SNP who opposed European Union membership in 1973, and that seemed to be missed from the Cabinet Secretary's history lesson earlier on. From the SNP who spent more in the 2019 Scottish Parliament by-election than they spent in the 2016 referendum. From the SNP that failed to vote in the House of Commons for membership of the Customs Union in the 2019 indicative votes. And from the SNP Cabinet Secretary who, when in the House of Commons, described the Lisbon Treaty, one of the foundational documents of the European Union, as unacceptable and a travesty. The SNP can try and claim today their consistent support for European Union membership, but the record suggests somewhat otherwise. This debate, therefore, is not just opportunistic, it is performative. We know Brexit has been costly and damaging, and we know too. I'll take an intervention from Mr. Harvey.
Patrick Harvey.
I'm grateful to Neil Bibby for giving way. I may be mistaken, but I don't recall him voting against the business motion which agreed, when Parliament agreed that we should have this debate. But if he wants to turn it into a criticism of others for inconsistency with a position decades ago, can he explain why Labour is now inconsistent with the position it was arguing less than 1 decade ago, that Brexit would be a catastrophic decision for the UK to make?
Neil Bibby, and I give the sign back.
My point, Mr Harvey, is we should be focusing on the issues that matter to the people of Scotland that we are responsible for. In terms of Labour's position, our position that we are taking forward is in line with the mandate we received at the general election, and we will be progressing that in the months and years ahead. Because we do know, and we do accept, that Brexit has been costly and damaging. And we know too that the Tories left the EU without a plan for growth, because Kemi Badenoch has actually told us that as well. That and the Liz Truss budget has significantly damaged our relationship with the EU, economic growth and living standards. People now expect us to fix this mess, and that's exactly what they gave the new UK Labour government a mandate to do so. Yes, I'll take an intervention.
Cabinet Secretary.
Does Mr Bibby agree that fishing is devolved? And if he agrees with that, can he explain why it is that the UK government has had no detailed discussions with devolved administrations about potentially making a deal around fishing as soon as next week? Does he find that acceptable?
Neil Bibby.
I think what is acceptable is the UK Labour government is getting on the job of fixing the mess that the Tories left in relation to Brexit. And I've said to Mr Robertson, I'll say it for a second time, Mr Robertson's policy isn't for fishing to be devolved. He wants to rejoin the European Union and rejoin the Common Fisheries Policy. And that was, I think, the context of his quote about the Lisbon Treaty was in relation to fisheries, when he called it unacceptable and a travesty. The UK Labour government is getting on with that job to reset our relationship with the European Union, to support Scottish businesses and jobs, which the UK Labour government is doing by negotiating trade deals with the United States and India, to protect our citizens, which the UK Labour government is doing by increasing defence spending. I want to make some progress, thank you. And to grow the economy. And that's what the UK Labour government is also doing, with figures announced today showing that the UK, for the first 3 months of this year, has the fastest growing economy in the G7. And meanwhile, what has the SNP government or the Cabinet Secretary actually done to deal with the mess that we've been left in? I would say nothing but complain from the sidelines. But the SNP have done one thing at least to rebuild relations with our EU neighbours. Yes, they've overlooked Scottish jobs and Scottish industry by sending ferry contracts to Poland. Hardly actions of a nationalist government. And what is the SNP solution? We've heard it already. Full fiscal autonomy and independence that would cost Scotland £12.8 billion. That's only going to damage economic growth and damage living standards. Scotland exports 61% and around £50 billion of goods to the rest of the UK. Independence would make Brexit look like a cakewalk. Presiding officer, I'll give way.
Stephen Kerr.
I'm interested, because I know and respect Neil Bibby. I am interested to know whether he thinks it is right that the EU would make security conditional on access to our fishing rights. And does he know if it's true, according to the front page of the Financial Times, according to internal EU documents, does he know if it's true that the United Kingdom government has already offered that extensive long-term access to UK fishing waters to the EU?
Neil Bibby.
I'm afraid I don't know, Mr Kerr, but I know the UK. What I do know is the UK Labour government will be working in the national interest, to progress our national interest, but also seeking cooperation with the EU where we can and where that's appropriate, in line with our manifesto. That is the position that we've set out. I do also welcome the new UK Labour government is seeking to enter a strategic partnership between the UK and the EU on trade, security and defence. The situation with Europe requires work, and that is what we are focused on. And next week, the UK government and the EU will hold a summit which was part of a wider plan to reset relations. The reset with the EU provides a fantastic opportunity to support and strengthen Scottish businesses and industries, and the UK Government is hoping to agree a veterinary and SPS agreement as put forward in our manifesto last year. This would allow agricultural products... I'm sorry, I've already taken 3, but if you're very brief.
Claire Adamson.
I just listened to what Mr Bibby saying about the UK Government and it having Scotland's best interests at heart. But how on earth, with a falling population, with a constant cry out for people to come and work in our care sector and other sectors, does the rhetoric coming from the UK Government and Keir Starmer act in any way towards Scotland's best interests?
Neil Bibby.
Well, if we want more people to work in the care sector, we need to start paying care workers more money. The trade unions in the care sector have been demanding £15 an hour from this government, and the government came nowhere near to meeting that pledge. So if we're serious about investing and retaining staff in the care sector, we need to pay our workers more. And in terms of protecting Scottish interests, as I was just saying, we want to ensure that we have that veterinary and SPS agreement that would boost support for agricultural products as well as food and drink to be traded more cheaply between the UK and the EU. And removing these barriers would also improve exports, with a study by Aston University estimating that an agreement could increase agri-food exports from the UK to the EU by at least 22.5%. Other issues will, of course, be discussed, including youth mobility, energy cooperation, defence and security, and particularly our support for Ukraine. The UK and the EU will have different priorities, as we've heard, but I welcome that the UK Labour Government has stated it will work in the national interest as well as seeking cooperation with the European friends and neighbours on key issues in line with the manifesto it was elected on. Presiding Officer, this is a serious approach from a UK Government that is serious about rebuilding our economy and rebuilding our relations with the EU. As I said at the start, the SNP Government should focus on its responsibilities to improve living standards and economic growth, using the powers and the record funding settlement it has had from the UK Government, but of course its ultimate policy position, for as long as that lasts, run counter to that objective. I move the amendment in my name.
Thank you. And I now call on Patrick Harvie, a generous 6 minutes. Mr Harvie.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Look, I think it's inevitable that a debate like this is, to some extent, going to rehearse arguments from the run-up to 2016 and everything that happened since. There are, of course, those of us who argued against Brexit back then and have not changed our position. Very clear that the damage that we predicted has happened. We can point to it, we can see it, we can feel it in our economy, in our communities, and in the rights and freedoms of our citizens having been reduced. Then there are those who argued for Brexit and are currently having to go through extraordinary mental gymnastics in order to deny the reality of that harm. I mean, with the best will in the world, Mr Kerr might as well have stood up and sung Rule Britannia for 10 minutes. It would have made as much sense as the speech that he just gave. But there's an additional dimension now, 9 years on from that referendum. We don't just have pro-Brexiteers and pro-Europeans. We now also have a cohort of politicians who argued just as vociferously as the rest of us that Brexit would be harmful, would be catastrophic indeed for the UK and for Scotland, and yet who are now, let's be generous and say they are resigned to it. They're merely resigned to it. They are simply not willing to be consistent with the position that they set out just 9 years ago. And I remind Mr Bibby, he was criticising others for inconsistency with a position from 50 years ago. And this is inconsistency with a position from just 9 years ago. I am very happy for my part to restate the case for membership of a modern, democratic family of nations in the European Union, whether that's around the economic heft that comes from the size of the EU. And we probably wouldn't have predicted then the unilateral trade war that's been sparked off by the US, but very clearly a trading bloc on the scale of the European Union has a degree of heft that the UK no longer has on its own. Whether that's the voice of the EU on the world stage, being part of what had been for a long time by 2016 already, one of the most progressive voices in the global climate debate around the world, we're no longer part of that. Whether it's around shared regulation, whether you believe in a deregulated free market or a well-regulated balanced market, having shared regulation across a larger market brings many advantages. Or indeed, and I think this is the strongest argument, the value of freedom of movement. Because as I've said before, for not just generations, for centuries, the young people of the countries of Europe grew up knowing that their best chance of seeing another part of Europe was if their own governments rounded them up, marched them into fields and ditches and made them slaughter one another in the service of a ruling class. Very often the same ruling class between different countries on different sides of the various wars. And after the horrors of the Second World War, the countries of Europe began to build the institutions that turned into the EU and created a different future for young people. One in which they can decide on their own terms and at their own time whether they want to travel, to learn, to work, to play, to build a life and to be part of a community together. Freedom of movement was one of the most astonishing political achievements in the post-war era, and it is a betrayal of the rights and interests of the next generation that they've had those freedoms taken away. In fact, they've had those freedoms, those liberties, taken away by people who've got the nerve to call themselves libertarians in many cases. Those freedoms have been removed from young people. So the case for rejoining is very clear and, in my view, urgent. And I think that case for rejoining applies whether you're focused on Scotland's future or the rest of the UK or the UK as a whole. But in addition to that case for rejoining, we're now faced with a new dynamic, a new and very dangerous dynamic, because the UK for a long time has sought to have this attempt to face across both directions, to Europe and be part of Europe, and across the Atlantic and to treat the US as one of its most trustworthy partners. And the US, under its new fascist administration, can no longer be treated as a reliable, trustworthy partner. It's unleashing unilateral economic attacks on previous allies, direct security threats, and not treating a country like Russia as the security threat that it is. It's actively promoting far-right politics in European countries, and it is a threat to democratic countries that it previously treated as allies. In short, the UK can no longer afford this dual approach to the world, this idea that it doesn't need to choose between a democratic, peaceful family of nations in the European Union and an anti-democratic threat, an anti-environment threat, an anti-social justice threat that's coming from the US. The UK government must make that choice. And I deeply regret that at the moment we have a UK government that is refusing to make that choice, is kowtowing to the US administration and appears unwilling to commit to what it calls a reset. I would love a reset with our relationship with the European Union if that reset means restoring the rights, freedoms and opportunities of young people to move on their terms, when they choose, for their purposes, or indeed the right for economic integration with our European family of nations. But that level of reset doesn't seem to be on offer from the UK. And if we want it, the only way to get it will be to do it for Scotland as an independent member of the European Union.
Thank you. I now call Alex Cole-Hamilton, a similarly generous 6 minutes. Mr. Cole-Hamilton.
Thank you very much indeed, Presiding Officer. And obviously, as an ardent European, it gives me great pleasure to speak in any such debate as this. I'm grateful for the government making time for it. Because, as we've heard, last Friday did mark Europe Day. European nations across the continent marked and indeed celebrated the legacy of a Europe rebuilt from the ashes of the Second World War, not through rivalry or conquest, but through cooperation, through solidarity and, of course, peace. And I think Cabinet Secretary was absolutely right to reference the Schuman Declaration, a bold, hopeful vision for a future where countries work together to solve common challenges, particularly profound in part of the world that has been ravaged by war for centuries, on a continent that, until then, had all been too often defined by those conflicts. And I think it was right that the first treaty of European Union was the European Coal and Steel Community, so that it could give a collective assurance that no country, no member country or signatory country to that treaty could ever again build a war machine, because we could see that the signs of rearmament that led to the Second World War could never again be manifest. That legacy is now all the more important in the context of the tragic situation that has been unfolding in Ukraine since the full-scale invasion in 2022. Indeed, since the initial invasion in 2014, war has returned to continental Europe. It is a reality that has been brought home to me in visceral clarity, not least from the testimony of the Ukrainian refugee who shared our home for 9 months, but also in the convoy that it was my privilege to take part in with Paul Sweeney over the Easter break, when we drove 5 ambulances to Lviv. In downtown Lviv, there is a city park which is not dissimilar to Princes Street Gardens, or at least it was until the start of the full-scale invasion in 2022. It is now known as the Field of Mars and is a cemetery for the glorious defenders of Ukraine. And there are funerals held there by city officials every single day. There were 3 on the morning of our arrival alone. I think that speaks, Presiding Officer, to the reality that war is never far away, that the Treaty of European Union has kept this continent safe, but we need to safeguard that in other ways too. That war, the Ukrainian defence of Ukraine, is just 3 tanks of diesel away. 3 tanks of diesel away. And, Presiding Officer, Liberal Democrats, I would certainly give way to Stephen.
Stephen Kerr.
I know and respect the fact that Alec Cole-Hamilton is a very strong supporter of the European Union. But I'm going to ask him, and he can predict the same question I've asked other colleagues. It's not right, surely, that the European Union hinges security cooperation on issues like long-term access to UK territorial fishing waters and other things. Surely when we're facing, and he's been very eloquent, and rightly so, and articulate on this subject, surely when we're facing what we're facing, we should come together without terms and conditions.
Alex Cole-Hamilton.
I'm very grateful to Stephen Kerr for his intervention, and I think he speaks the mind of a lot of members in this chamber, that we do face in many ways an existential threat to the freedoms that we enjoy. And in the teeth of such a threat, we should not be playing politics with other aspects of state interests or multi-state interests. So I have some sympathy with remarks around that. We've yet to see exactly what the detail of such proposals are, but I would, and I'm sure other ardent Europeans would take a dim view if security cooperation were linked to other sideshow issues, as important as they may be. Presiding Officer, Liberal Democrats are internationalists and unapologetically pro-European to our fingertips. The advent of Brexit, or the Brexit referendum 9 years ago, causes us pain to this day. We believe in a Scotland at the heart of Britain and Britain at the heart of Europe. And we see those 4 freedoms that were first espoused in the Treaty of Rome, the free movement of goods, people, capital and services, as being underpinning the most important charter for freedom that the world has ever seen. Brexit was a body blow to that vision. There's no question about it. And let's be honest about the consequences that we all still face. The Trade and Cooperation Agreement has now been in force for 4 years. It removed tariffs and quotas, but left enormous friction in the form of red tape and bureaucracy, which is holding back our exporters, our artists and service industries, and stifling growth in our economy. While our young people have lost the opportunities to live, learn, to work across Europe, experiences which were so formative to those of us who benefited from them in our youth, I welcome the commitment from the UK government to reset our relationship with Europe. But words alone are not enough. We need a tangible youth mobility scheme, and our young people are still missing out on the EU Erasmus scheme, a scheme that not only provided sometimes life-changing formative experiences to our young people, giving them the opportunity to live and study and work in Europe, but it could also benefit our economy, enrich our academic institutions, particularly in areas like the hospitality sector as well. There is such low-hanging fruit in this, little steps that would mutually benefit both us and our European neighbours, like mutual recognition of professional qualifications to open up labour markets or participation in EU research programmes. I will give way to the Cabinet Secretary.
Cabinet Secretary.
While talking about the potential areas of agreement in next week's summit, does Mr Cole-Hamilton agree with me that Creative Europe, in addition to Erasmus+, is an area that the UK government should seek agreement with the European Union? It would be transformational for our cultural sector and for our screen sector in particular. So would he take the opportunity of highlighting the advantages not only of rejoining the Erasmus Plus programme, but rejoining the Creative Europe programme as well?
Alex Cole-Hamilton.
I'm grateful to the Cabinet Secretary for his intervention. He speaks my mind. I think one of the untold tragedies of Brexit is the massive impact on our creative sector. So I absolutely support his remarks and I associate myself with them as well. But Liberal Democrats also want those to be the first baby steps back towards tangibly rejoining the single market and customs union as part of a longer roadmap back to our future with Europe. We're not naive. We know it can't happen tomorrow, it can't happen overnight, but by taking the steps now, closer and closer integration can be achieved. Presiding Officer, we are stronger when we work together. When we work together in this chamber, when we work together across this island of nations, and also when we work together with our closest European neighbours. I think Patrick Harvey was right. You know, we are perhaps less dependable. We can depend less on the United States today than we could perhaps as little as 3 months ago. And in that reality, that realignment of national alliances, we must look to our nearest European neighbours. The UK's place is in Europe. It's part of Europe. And that is the Liberal Democrat vision. As one is that we will continue to fight and work for in chambers like this. Thank you.
Thank you. We now move to the open debate. I call first Emma Roddick to be followed by Eleanor Whittam. Again, a generous 6 minutes. Ms Roddick.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I want to start by addressing that it is disgraceful that the UK Government is yet again completely ignoring devolved nations when it comes to something as fundamental as engaging with the EU. And I'm not surprised that Stephen Kerr is getting tired of listening to the Scottish Government object to this country and its elected representatives being overlooked, overridden and obstructed by the UK Government, because we're all tired of it happening. It happens all the time, and it happened just as much when his party was in charge. So it is no surprise that the Tory amendment today boils down to "Weisht and Know Your Place, Scotland." But it is very sad that Labour's just launches into a full welcoming of the UK speaking to the EU without even bothering to acknowledge that the same UK Government isn't speaking to Scotland. I found the tone incredible, so I actually counted, and their amendment contains the word welcome 6 times. Labour MSPs are still MSPs, and it's frankly embarrassing how content they are with their own party treating this place with no respect and no consideration. And it must really be a great comfort to Keir Starmer, in the midst of so many different groups being utterly furious and gutted by his performance so far as Prime Minister, that it doesn't matter how blatantly or publicly he disrespects Scotland, his MSPs will be there to warmly welcome it. I'll take an intervention. Cabinet Secretary.
Does Emma Roddick agree with me that it is odd, to say the least, that the Welsh Labour Government is prepared to raise the same concerns with the UK Government and how it is conducting its business and how it is not informing the devolved administrations, yet the Scottish Labour Party puts down motions welcoming everything, unprepared to criticise on this point, and frankly it's pretty embarrassing. If it's possible for their Welsh Labour colleagues to do it, why won't they? Emma Roddick.
Absolutely. I'm embarrassed for them, and I hope that they will choose to address this later on in the debate. When I look at the news, absolutely. Neil Bibby.
Thank you, Emma Roddick, for taking the intervention. Our amendment says we welcome the UK resetting relations with the EU. We welcome the summit to be held. We welcome the commitment by the UK Government to create a strategic partnership between the UK and the EU. We welcome the UK Government's specific commitment to negotiate a sanitary and phytosanitary veterinary agreement, and we welcome the commitment by the Prime Minister to improve security cooperation with the EU as well. Does the member welcome those things as well? Emma Roddick.
Again, 6 welcomes and not one mention of the fact that Scotland's not even been invited to the table. Labour MSPs haven't been invited to the table. It is incredibly embarrassing. Now, when I look at the news, I often see coverage of movement at Westminster, in Whitehall, the European Parliament, the European Union, and I don't feel connected to what is being done on our behalf in London right now. I don't identify with the anti-migration, anti-equality, anti-welfare rhetoric coming out of the mouths of Keir Starmer and his cabinet. And I don't believe that Scotland on the whole does either. Now, I often identify with progress being made at a European level, the protections that the Parliament brought in for people, ensuring that their data and safety are not compromised by poor or misuse of artificial intelligence, working together to tackle climate change and restore peace in Europe and across the world. Our values align with those of the European Union, and more every day they do not align with the United Kingdom. Now, we still don't know and may never appreciate the full impact of Brexit economically, socially or culturally. And I admit, Presiding Officer, back in 2016 I campaigned for Remain, and I believed that it was the right thing to do, and I was saddened by the result. But I didn't consider EU membership core to my political beliefs or necessary for the furtherance of them. But I don't think that way now. Seeing war and climate catastrophe inch closer and watching as the UK fails to act on shared crises like climate change, artificial intelligence threats and human rights violations, Scotland needs to be back in with our neighbours, back in working with other nations on shared challenges and doing so as an independent country. There will be times that we disagree with other countries, but we would be doing so on an even footing, in stark contrast to the way that we're being treated in the local union, where our English counterparts don't even see fit to share information with Scotland ahead of engagement with the European Union on our behalf. Closer energy and climate cooperation with the EU is no longer an optional extra, it is a global imperative. We should be working hand in hand with our European partners to tackle the climate emergency, not create obstacles. And that's what Brexit's done. It erected barriers to trade, it damaged our vital industries, and it made it harder for people to come and contribute to this society. Young people have missed out on countless opportunities, our NHS and medical research efforts have been isolated, and people have been made poorer. It has been a profound failure, but Keir Starmer seems dead set on exacerbating it any way he can. Not content with Brexit's existing damage to the Scottish economy, estimated to be about £4 billion, he's reacting to people turning away from his party over its many broken promises by appealing to migration panic and making it even harder for people to come over here and fill our health and social care vacancies. And he's made clear that he'd rather suck up to Trump than fix the damage caused by leaving the single market and the customs union. His red lines on Brexit should have been top of the list when he was considering which election promises to break. At least that would have improved things for the UK as a whole, rather than hurting pensioners, disabled people, Grangemouth workers or WASPy women. Dropping red lines on freedom of movement isn't just about addressing the damage done to freedom of movement, it is about our values. Scotland is an open, welcoming nation, and we have a history of not just accepting but valuing fully the social and cultural ties that come with migration. We're being badly served by the UK, regardless of who is in power within it. The reaction to a rise in divisive rhetoric should not be to pander to it. It should be to remain steadfast in our positive vision for an independent Scotland and Europe, which works constantly towards upholding fundamental human rights. And I'm glad that the Scottish Government, at least, seems to remain committed to doing exactly that. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call Eleanor Whittam to be followed by Paul Sweeney. Again, a generous 6 minutes. Ms Whittam.
Today I speak not just as a member of the Scottish Parliament and an unapologetic European, but as someone who knows deeply and personally the cost of disconnection. Disconnection from community and kin, disconnection from opportunity, from progress and from partnership. This is the true cost of Scotland that Scotland is paying as a result of Brexit. A Brexit that we did not collectively vote for, a Brexit that was imposed upon us, and a Brexit that continues to inflict damage on our communities and our economy. And at one point, not that long ago, this Parliament agreed, and let me be clear, it was a deeply held belief across most of the Chamber, that the best relationship that Scotland, and indeed the entire of the UK, can have with the European Union was to be a full member. And we now find ourselves, to my deep shame, it should be to all of our deep shame, in an island of strangers, a Farage-esque, inward-looking Little Britain nightmare. Deputy Presiding Officer, I find it deeply frustrating and very distasteful that as an economic migrant at the age of 6 to Canada, my family was known as expats, as if we were something exceptional. And I think that had a lot to do with the colour of our skin. I don't for one moment believe that the people of Scotland truly want us to accept that there's no way back for us to become part of the EU once again. Not just to rebuild what we had, but to rediscover who we are. They don't recognise the politics of Westminster anymore. Because the European Union was never just about trade or tariffs. It was about solidarity. It was about shared values. And it was about standing shoulder to shoulder with our neighbours to face the challenges of our age: climate change, social inequality, global health crises and conflict. And at a time when we see war once again raging in Europe, we should be doing everything within our power to reignite that solidarity. And we won't do that by tinkering about the edges. And I do not believe it should be contingent on access to our fishing waters. Presiding Officer, Brexit has not delivered the sunlit uplands that we were promised. Far, far from it. It has delivered uncertainty for our businesses, anxiety for our young people, and barriers for our farmers, our fishers and our food and drink sector, one of Scotland's greatest economic assets. Our creative industries, our health system, our universities, all of them have been harmed by the UK government. Past and present red lines that have become shackles. The refusal to even entertain access to the single market, the rejection of the customs union and the ideological opposition to freedom of movement. These choices were not inevitable, they were political. And they were choices made without the meaningful involvement of Scotland's people or our Parliament. And we can see that that continues to happen. And I think my colleague Emma Roddick highlighted just how our Labour colleagues are just not actually being able to even challenge that. When UK ministers speak of social care workers as being unskilled, it makes my hackles rise up, Presiding Officer. Being a patient, caring, kind, compassionate and dedicated care worker takes great skill, and we should all do well to remember that. It's time, it's actually past time, for the UK Government to drop these red lines. If they will not revisit their decision for the sake of principle, then I ask them to do so for the sake of people. For the small business in Ayrshire that used to export cheese to France with ease, but now faces paperwork delays and lost markets. For the nurse from Spain who used to work in our NHS, who no longer feels welcome. For the young person in Cumnock or Catrin, whose dreams of studying or working in Europe now face borders, both literal and bureaucratic. At the upcoming UK-EU summit, the UK Government has a rare opportunity, a chance to turn the page, to begin rebuilding trust and cooperation, and I welcome all of that. But that process must start with ambition. Today we must call on the UK Government to pursue a bold veterinary food and drink agreement, one that can remove burdens from our farmers and our producers, restore some measures of frictionless trade and bring immediate benefits to both sides of the Channel. And we must collectively call for closer energy and climate cooperation. We are in a climate and biodiversity emergency. Scotland is rich in renewable potential and the climate crisis knows no borders. By aligning with the EU standards, by collaborating on innovation, research and resilience, we can deliver a greener, fairer future for all of us. And yes, we must call for greater freedom of movement because people are not commodities. Our ability to live, work, study and love across Europe enriched our society and expanded our horizons. For our young people in particular, the loss of Erasmus and the barriers to cultural and educational exchange are a wound that must be healed. We owe them better. We owe them the world. Presiding Officer, let me be absolutely clear. It is not only the content of the UK Government's approach that is unacceptable, it's the manner. The fact that they have not shared any draft summit text with the Scottish Government or any of the devolved administrations is an insult to the principles of devolution and democracy. It treats this Parliament, and by extension the people that we represent, as afterthoughts. We've got very unique issues surrounding depopulation and skills in Scotland, and we should have the same powers as a Canadian province over migration visas. I keep hearing constantly that this is the most powerful devolved parliament in all of the world, but the Quebec province that I used to live in has more powers than this place. We are not afterthoughts in Scotland. Scotland has a voice, and today we must use ours here to amplify it.
Thank you. I now call Paul Sweeney to be followed by Christine Graham. Again, a generous 6 minutes. Mr Sweeney.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I certainly share the sentiments expressed across the Chamber today that our European neighbours are essential for Scotland's trade, security and defence. And that is why I was pleased that as soon as Labour came into government last July, effort was undertaken. It's genuine and sincere effort to begin the hard task of resetting our relationship with our closest neighbours. It's always been fairly axiomatic for me. The biggest determinant of trade is geographic proximity. And it's quite an obvious deduction. It's easier to do trade with someone across the street than it is on a different continent. Therefore, the same logic applies at a national level. Therefore, reducing the frictions and impediments to undertaking that trade is beneficial mutually for our common prosperity. And that is essentially, once you distill it down, the essence of what the European project has been about since the end of the Second World War. And yes, I'm happy to give way.
Yeah.
Because he is making a good point about trading goods. But the UK economy is largely now a service economy. And the delivery of services is not now, because of the age we live in, contingent on proximity. Because we have the means to span the world through a Zoom call or through other technological means. So it's not entirely true to say that trade is restricted, particularly for this economy, by geography.
Paul Sweeney.
I think the member makes a very fair point in some respects, but nonetheless significant parts of our economy are contingent on goods exports and trade, and that is important nonetheless. Similarly, a lot of services rely on physical interaction. Whether it's care provision, healthcare provision, it actually requires physical interaction. So there are instances where it still is very important, and the net total is if you impede any of that, it causes problems for our common prosperity. So I think that's why it still remains a logical point that we ought to continue to remove barriers to that trade where possible at every level. Whether it's building a better infrastructure locally or improving our trading relationships internationally. So that's why I found the whole period of the previous Conservative UK government utterly obnoxious when they frequently would use hostile rhetoric about the European Union, blaming Europe in an abstract sense for the challenges with trade disruption, inflation and labour shortages that followed Brexit. And ultimately, when you boil it down, it was based on an utter lie or an impossible trinity of issues that was presented. The promises, there were three promises essentially made as a result of the Brexit proposition, which was to leave the single market and customs union, to have no border between the GB and the Northern Ireland, and then also to have no border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. It was impossible to achieve all of those things. And effectively what happened was there was a border put down the Irish Sea, an all but name, and that's how they cobbled together this Brexit deal and covered their obnoxious, wrong-headed approach and illogical approach with hostile rhetoric about the European Union. There's no doubt about it that the EU was a useful scapegoat for the previous government's woeful handling of issues at home, not least their appalling and destructive austerity programme since 2010. The approach was hugely damaging for our economy and the businesses that rely on exporting to our #1 trading partner, but also led to falling living standards where people felt deep frustration that improvements weren't possible, particularly in working class communities, a deep alienation set in that persists to this day. And I think we have not been honest enough amongst all parties about the real trade-offs required to overcome the challenges this country faces. The handling of the so-called Brexit trilemma and the cobbled-together threadbare deal that Boris Johnson's administration arrived at undoubtedly harmed the Scottish economy, and repairing that damage will take some time. And the Conservatives, even today, their leader at Westminster continues are on the same tracks, indulging in hostile rhetoric about the European Union to fire up a Eurosceptic base vowing to rip up the forthcoming deal with the European Union, even though she has not seen the detail of that. It's very much a government-to-government stage, and I hope that further collaboration will emerge. But I'm just glad that these vandals are no longer in charge of what's going on. Yet, just as the Conservatives do, we've also seen, I feel, rather unfair attempts to manipulate this relationship we're trying to build with Europe for political convenience, when the government is trying to get on to forge deeper and stronger ties on a bilateral basis. I recall the difficulty we had when I was a member of the House of Commons back in 2019, trying to navigate this. This was my very robust apprenticeship in parliamentary politics and trying to navigate the Brexit dilemma where the country had voted leave in a very simplistic binary way. How do you distill that down into a workable set of proposals? And of course, there were these indicative votes. I have to give way to Mr Doris.
Bob Doris.
I thank Paul Sweeney for giving way. Can I commend Paul Sweeney's work as convener of cross-party group migration in the Scottish Parliament, where I'm the deputy convener. And you make a very good point, Mr Sweeney, about hostile environments. In that light, I know you're in a difficult position, Mr Sweeney, can you reflect on the comments from Keir Starmer about a nation of strangers and how that creates a hostile environment for many new Scots we rely on in our core public services within Scotland today?
Paul Sweeney.
Well, it's certainly not language that I would have used, and certainly I think Glasgow is a very good demonstration of exactly how you avoid becoming strangers, the complexity, the sophistication of the integration effort in that city. And I remember when I was growing up, the murder of a Kurdish refugee in Sighthill in 1999 when I was 10 years old, and the real community discord at that time. And I think there was a danger that Glasgow was potentially becoming a city riven by racial strife. But the effort that was put in by that community to rebuild trust, to establish connection, is really powerful. And I think we can hopefully learn a positive lesson from that experience in Glasgow, across Scotland and the wider United Kingdom. I think where you've had real settled and established relationships built over time, that sense of hostility to migration does abate. And it's important we learn the right lessons from our experience in Glasgow, and we can teach a lot of our neighbours across the UK in that regard. So when I look around Europe and what we can do, I think it's centred around defence and security. Of course, Mr Clamilton mentioned our recent trip to Ukraine, how critical the European Union is becoming in the context of American isolationism to our common defence and security, previously an area of policy largely confined to NATO. And I think it's important Scotland steps up and plays its role with its defence capabilities, its technology and its economic capacity to support our European colleagues. And I think we can do a lot on a bilateral basis with Ukraine to build that capability. And that's certainly a constructive offer or suggestion that I would make to the Minister for his consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. And I call Christine Graham to be followed by George Adam.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I'll start with Brexit, but I'm not lingering there. Stephen Kerr is too easy a target. Indeed, he delights in being a target. Not only did 62% of Scots reject Brexit at the EU referendum nearly 10 years ago, that percentage has risen throughout the rest of the UK, and now 55% think it was a mistake and only 30% think it was a good idea. You don't need a PhD to know why this is the case. Higher costs, more red tape, no £375 million extra a week redirected to the NHS, blazoned on the side of buses. And that's just for starters. We lost freedom of movement of workforce across Europe, impacting across the Scottish economy, but particularly in the hospitality, care and horticultural sectors. This, of course, is now exacerbated by a UK hike in employer national insurance costs, a tax on jobs, if ever there was one, and now the ill-considered comments and policies of Sir Keir Starmer on legal migration. We need migrants here. We know we have an ageing population, a falling available workforce, so we cannot separate Scotland's domestic needs from what the UK or what Europe does, or indeed the world's wider conflicts. But the target arises.
Stephen Kerr.
But I'm sure that Christine Graham would not disagree that we have very high levels of worklessness throughout the United Kingdom and Scotland as well, and we really need to not use mass immigration as an excuse for not investing in our own population and equipping them to do the jobs that we currently seem to expect migrant labour to perform.
Christine Graham.
First of all, the member has to accept that we have a very ageing population and not enough national births, as it were, to have sufficient available workforce. And I certainly want people who come here to work from elsewhere to have a decent pay. I don't want them to be underpaid. But we simply don't have the right population balance. But I also want to mourn the loss of European influence, not only through us quitting the EU, but more broadly. For me, it's sadly ironic that just as the UK commemorated and celebrated the 80th anniversary of VE Day on the 8th of May 1945, marking the end of the Second World War in Europe, we see a European nation, Ukraine, still occupied and bombarded by Russia, and that illegal occupation is now in its third year. But in this new world order, it's referred to as a war. but it's an occupation. It is also being suggested that the Ukraine must surrender part of its sovereign territory to Russia. To secure military aid from the Trump regime, surrender some of its minerals to the US. I think it's termed, quotes, contractual politics, and I want nothing to do with it. That's the new world order for you. While I'm referencing President Trump, I see him as symbolic of this order, but not the cause of it, though he's giving it his blessing with just a scratch of his Sharpie. His bizarre, fractious and fluctuating politics has at last woken Europe and indeed NATO up to the chaos and fragility around them. But from Putin to Netanyahu, because this extends beyond Europe's boundaries to Gaza, too many have apparently accepted Netanyahu's genocide, even tacitly. I can do no better than refer you to the extraordinary, heartfelt submission by the UN Emergency Relief Coordinator Tom Fletcher to the UN Security Council just days ago, who said that Israel was, quotes, deliberately and unashamedly imposing inhumane conditions on civilians in Gaza and the West Bank. For more than 10 weeks, nothing has entered Gaza. No food, no medicine, water or tents. Hundreds of thousands of Palestinians have been forcibly displaced and confined to ever-shrinking spaces, as 70% of Gaza's territory is either within Israel militarised zones or under displacement orders. Every single one of the 2.1 million Palestinians in the Gaza Strip face the risk of famine. 1 in 5, starvation. The few hospitals that have somehow survived bombardment are overwhelmed. The medics who have somehow survived drone and sniper attacks cannot keep up with the trauma and the spread of disease. Appalling violence is also increasing in the West Bank, where the situation is the worst in decades. The world's press is, if I may have my time back, yes, certainly.
Patrick Harvey.
I'm very grateful to Christine Graham for giving way. I'm very strongly pro-European, as I've made clear, but would Christine Graham agree that this is an area where the European Union has failed? It has taken a strong position on sanctions against Russia for the occupation of Ukraine. The same strong position against the occupation of Palestine should have been taken and hasn't.
Christine Graham.
You've actually preempted where I'm going with this narrative. Entire communities have been destroyed in the West Bank, refugee camps depopulated. The world's press is banned. No wonder. What is Europe saying here? Of Ukraine, we have the coalition of the willing, in quotes. Better than nothing. But meantime, Russia's occupation creeps further and embeds itself deeper into Ukraine's sovereign territory. Of Gaza, the European Council has called for an immediate return to the full implementation of the ceasefire hostage release agreement. The importance of unimpeded access and sustained distribution of humanitarian assistance at scale into and throughout Gaza, and a two-state solution. Is it enough? I don't think so. It's better than nothing, but it's certainly not enough. Brexit was not just bad for the UK and the Scottish economies. It reduced the UK and Europe's status and influence in world affairs. We need a strong European Union with an independent Scotland a partner as a member state, not simply for economic reasons, but as an international political force to counterbalance, to challenge this new world order. We cannot leave it to those contractual politics, to Putin, to Netanyahu, to Trump, to name but 3 international villains. It's not just about economics. Thank you.
Thank you, and I call on George Adam, the final speaker in the open debate.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And can I first, it's never good to start with an apology, but can I first apologise for not being here for the start of the Cabinet Secretary's speech. It's becoming difficult for Stacey and I to get from one end of the campus to the other since my speech the other day, now that we are the middle-aged posh and becks of the Scottish Parliament. So, basically, with this debate, let me start with something that's already been talked about. This week started with a Labour Prime Minister talking about us being an island of strangers. Here in Scotland, a nation that has, over the years, welcomed people in to actually make our nation, our home, our communities better. a nation that has constantly looked to others to come here and be new Scots. And we're living in that world when we've got the Trumps, sitting there, as Christine Graham said, with his marker pen and his big billboards of obviously making sure that penguins are getting tariffs as well. We're constantly dealing with this. What almost seems like some kind of, as if the alternate version of the world, that's, if someone had written this in a science fiction dystopian the book, we would think it was unrealistic. But unfortunately, this is what we're living in at the moment. And now we're living in a place where Farage is seen as some kind of saviour to some, and he's not far right. Well, he is. He's an extreme far right, but it's not helped by those in the Labour and the Conservative parties actually trying to become pound shop Farages. That does not help us in the least. And this afternoon, we've heard versions of that. We've heard Stephen Kerr doing his best impression of Al Murray's Brexit-loving offensive pub landlord. He stopped short of saying "back off Brussels," which is his tagline. But one of the things about that character is that's a caricature. That's hysterical. And Stephen Kerr is predictable. And we've heard talk of bonds of Britain and how it keeps us together. But Westminster forgets my community. All my life, Westminster's forgotten the people of Paisley in my community. All my life, those that I love and hold close to me have been forgotten about by Westminster. We are but pawns to them as we sit in the Westminster waiting room, waiting for a meeting to try and sort something out. But this debate is about Scotland. It seems to be the forgotten part of the United Kingdom. And that's why my constituents feel, and that's maybe where we're sitting in a situation where some people are getting disillusioned with politics. Some politicians, not all of us, because we do not speak the language that they speak, and we do not speak in a way that they can understand and about their world. And one of the things that, here is a perfect truth, Presiding Officer. The people of Paisley and across Scotland feel this every single day. Brexit was never Scotland's choice. And I know the opposition hate hearing this, but it was never Scotland's choice. We voted overwhelmingly to remain in the EU. Every single local authority, every single area in Scotland said no to Brexit. And yet it was forced on us by Westminster again. Forced by a Westminster government we didn't elect, and now we're living with the consequences. This hard Brexit has harmed our economy, weakened our rights and cuts us from the opportunities that the European Union offers. And what's worse, it's still causing damage, and neither of the Westminster parties seem to want to talk about this. Presiding Officer, I listened to a London-based news radio not so long ago, and there was a phone-in, and the number of people from down south who are now getting buyer's remorse with Brexit, because what has happened, what we said, is actually happening, and it's affecting them and their lives, and it's affecting their pocket. This is the real world. This is the real world. This isn't, when we come here, this isn't some debating society where we sit here and we kind of say our bit and we say our 6 minutes and we go. This is Scotland's Parliament. We should be talking about the issues that really matter to the people of Scotland. And this is an example of, yes, let's hear this from our very own Alf Garnett.
Stephen Kerr. Oh my goodness! Well, there we go. What a disgusting comment. I mean, goodness me! I thought that would be completely out of bounds, given the standards of respect we're supposed to have in this Parliament. But he's making the point of my amendment. Because the purpose of this Parliament would be to address things like NHS waiting times, falling levels of attainment, rising school violence, the state of our public finances, the incompetence of this SNP executive. That's what this Parliament should be doing. That's why the people of Scotland sent us here, George Adams.
Mr. Kerr never fails to entertain. But at the end of the day, the important thing here to the people of Scotland is we deal with all these issues which the government continually deals with, but we're being held back by Westminster. That's the problem. The problem for us is not some idea. Look, we mentioned independence and how Scotland can be a better place, how we can build a better nation. That's what I want for this chamber. I want to listen to Stephen Kerr talking about a better, independent Scotland, actually taking on the powers of responsibility ensuring that we can actually stand there at the top table of the European Union and actually make that negotiation. That's the important thing. That's what people want. They want us to do our jobs, and we need to go out there and say, independence is the way forward. We cannot sit here any longer and listen to the foppish arguments on one side and the absolute nonsense on the other. Labour have been in government for less than a year and they're out of control. They've lost control. They have no idea what they're doing. Every day it's one thing and something else comes out. The Tories, they're upset because they're no longer in government, so they've decided they're going to try and out-Farage himself. You know, that's not what the public want. The public need a government like the Scottish Government that is looking to the future and ensuring that we can actually build a better tomorrow. So this European... Yes, I'll take an intervention.
Paul Sweeney.
Does he accept, however, that every level of government has a part to play in promoting cohesion, and particularly in the context of several cities in Scotland having a housing emergency, continued inward migration may create community tensions, and that is a duty of this government to recognise the opportunity of it and build our way out of this and bring people together rather than creating further discord?
George Adam.
We have a duty to actually work together to ensure we can deliver for the people of Scotland. I do not agree that using a vulnerable community that comes to Scotland looking for a new beginning as an scapegoat, I do not agree with that in any shape or form. And that's part of the problem of this debate that we're currently having with the far right at the moment. So, with closing, Presiding Officer, what I'm looking for Scotland is an independent Scotland, but a European independent Scotland. Brexit is not just a past mistake, it's a current crisis. It's a slow-motion car crash that's hurting every single part of Scotland. It's harming our economy, it's making our people poorer, it's isolating our public services, and it's robbing the next generation of their rightful place in Europe. Scotland deserves better, Scotland wants better, Scotland needs better, and with independence, Scotland can choose better. So let's return to Europe.
One another.
Let's rejoin the community of nations we were dragged out of. Let's take our place not as a region in Westminster's waiting room, but as a nation and a country in our own right.
Thank you. And we move to winding up speeches, and I call on Patrick Harvey.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And can I first apologise to Christine Graham? If I had realised that she was moving on to make the point that I was trying to make, I wouldn't have interrupted. But I have to say that she made that point extremely well. And the challenge that we have to address as pro-Europeans is to acknowledge that being pro-European is not uncritical. It is not to be uncritical of the EU institutions. And in fact, if I have one major criticism of the campaign to remain from 9 years ago, it was that it wasn't willing enough to say Europe can change, can do better, whether on international issues, whether on climate, whether on equalities or anything else. And it should have been willing to talk about how Europe can and should change to address people's priorities. And I think that related as well to some of the points that George Adam was making about the impact on communities that feel that they're being poorly served. There is a reason why the slogan "Take Back Control" was a powerful slogan. I think it was a profoundly dishonest slogan, and if the 2014 independence campaign had rested on something as simplistic as a three-word slogan saying "Take Back Control," Presiding Officer, I would not have taken part in a campaign based on something so simplistic and dishonest. But the idea of taking back control was politically powerful because so many people don't feel that they have control. And that is a domestic matter. It's a matter about the structure of the UK state, about the funding of public services in Scotland as well as the rest of the UK. It's a domestic matter. It's not the European Union that is responsible for that feeling of a lack of control. And it's also to do with the power, the unaccountable power of private interests and the privatisation of what should be democratically accountable power in our society. Just to come to some of the points that the Scottish Government has been making about the negotiating position that it wants the UK Government to strike in the upcoming summit. I agree that there would be opportunities to at least ameliorate some of the damage of Brexit with an agreement on veterinary and food and drink arrangements, on high regulatory standards, as well as on climate and energy. And in recent weeks, we've debated net zero from a more sceptical position from the Conservatives. We've also debated hydrogen, for example, and a clear sense that while many of us are pointing out the shortcomings of using hydrogen in certain parts of our economy, there's a general consensus that green hydrogen can play a really significant part in our wider decarbonisation and in export. And there are other European countries that could see Scotland as a source of green hydrogen, and that would benefit our economy as well. But we need to be working together with those European countries to achieve that. As well as on issues like high voltage direct current interconnection for electricity with Europe, and on the skills for net zero, including building decarbonisation, where many European countries are literally decades ahead of Scotland, and there's a great deal to learn from. So certainly we should be doing more to work on that agenda with Europe. But I also want to question this idea of a reset. I genuinely hope that the UK Government have in mind a reset with Europe. They also have used the same language in relation to a reset with the devolved governments in the various parts of the UK. I don't see it yet. I don't see the flesh on the bones yet in either a reset with Europe or a reset with devolution. I hope it emerges, but really, months and months into the new UK administration, we should be seeing a little more detail by now. As for the issues around youth mobility absolutely should be one of the key priorities for the UK Government, and it should be seen as a step toward wider free movement. I want to echo the point that Eleanor Whittam made, that in the furore this week around the UK Government's announcements on migration, the portrayal of care work as being low-skilled and therefore low-valued in the broader sense is deeply offensive and harmful to those whose dedication just a few years ago was being applauded on the doorsteps right across the country as health and social care workers kept going during the pandemic. But also, quite aside from the rhetoric around strangers, which I found uncomfortable, and I think from Paul Sweeney's response, he found it uncomfortable as well, even if he might use more diplomatic language to criticise it than I would. It's not just that language itself. The idea that we have a UK Prime Minister openly promoting the far-right conspiracy theory that there has been an open borders experiment in the UK. Now, I know, Presiding Officer, that we are not expected to accuse anyone of lying in this chamber, and I will try not to do that, but it stretches the power of euphemism to try and describe accurately the nature of that claim. If there had been an experiment in open borders in the UK, there would have been no dawn raids. There would have been no detention centres. The people of Kenmure Street would not have had to fill that street to defend their neighbours from immigration enforcement. And there would never have been the bodies of children washing up on the shores of the Channel if there had been an open borders experiment. It is a falsehood to say that there's been an open borders experiment, and I think Sir Keir Starmer knows it. The final point, Presiding Officer, is this notion that we shouldn't be debating reserved issues. The Conservatives play that card when they like, and on other occasions, such as yesterday, when Mr Kerr, I think, spoke in the debate on a Tory motion, mostly about reserved issues, I was happy to debate that motion and explain why it was wrong, but it was largely about reserved issues, oil and gas licensing, and a great deal more besides.
Let's hear Mr Harvey.
In truth, Presiding Officer, the devolved reserve split has never been a precise one. It is less precise now than it was when this Parliament was created. And in much of the relationship with Europe, we see issues that impact on both devolved and reserved issues. Therefore, That spirit of collaboration, openness and developing shared positions between the governments of the UK, which the Cabinet Secretary was calling for, is all the more important. The UK isn't doing it. I hope to goodness that they change that attitude and take a more collaborative, open and democratic approach to negotiating with our European Union partners and achieving a restoration in our relationship with them. If they don't, I come back to where I ended my opening speech. If the UK government doesn't behave that way, then Scotland will have to take the power to itself to restore that relationship with Europe and to make those decisions in a democratically accountable way.
Thank you. And do let us avoid speaking over one another. And I call on Faisal Chowdhury.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. In a changed world, it is more important than ever we keep relationship with partners around the world strong and work in areas of mutual interest to meet goals which benefit our security and our economies. Following years of our international standings declining under the Conservative in Westminster, it is positive we now have a government that is working to rebuild those relationships and is open about the value of international cooperation. Last week saw Scotland and Europe mark the 80th anniversary of VE Day. Memories of war act as a stark reminder of what happens when we fail to work with our international colleagues. That is why I welcome the first UK-EU summit next week, where we can cement our new relationship and, as the Prime Minister says, look forward, not back, building a new strategic partnership with the EU to benefit Scotland's economy, defence and public safety. On the economy, I'm pleased to see the agreement with the UK government on the importance of an SPS agreement. Scotland exports the most food and drink out of any part of the United Kingdom, with the sector worth 16 billion to our economy. But since the Tories Brexit deal, we have seen agri-food trade with the EU fall, including falls of 29% from meat exports and dairy by 26%. We saw in the review of the Trade and Cooperation Agreement by the Constitution Europe External Affairs and Cultural Committee the impact this is having on businesses, with imports taking far longer and costs going up. A veterinary agreement has been estimated to increase exports by at least 22.5%. That is delivery which businesses want as soon as possible, not in several years' time. On defence, with threats to Scotland and the United Kingdom greater than they have been in previous years, cooperation is also key. The European Union has been taking a greater role in defence in recent years after Putin's illegal invasion of Ukraine. Formal collaboration will be key to supporting security across the continent, but also Scotland's defence sector. This will be bolstered by the UK Labour government increase in defence spending, which will boost Scotland's industry and defence sector, which employs thousands of people. The industry have told the Westminster Defence Committee that collaboration was vital to sustain capacity at home and our competitiveness in global market. They also say we have an opportunity to engage in a strategic conversation on defence with the EU due to the renewed relationship the UK government is pursuing. This is what a positive future with the EU looks like. As well as the EU, Scotland benefits from a positive and collaborative relationship with countries globally. The trade deal with India announced last week will add to the 600 million of exports we currently complete and give Scotland unique access to one of the world's fastest growing economies. The deal will benefit Scottish businesses by lowering tariffs on areas we are lenders in, like whisky. The Scottish Whisky Association said it was transformational and will increase export by $1 billion over the next 5 years and create jobs. These actions, rebuilding our relationship with Europe, improving our security and defence, and trade deals boosting the Scottish economy, demonstrate the power of both international cooperation and a pragmatic approach to tackling the challenges we face. It shows that if we want to be successful in delivering for Scotland's people, we must look to the future and work together when it is in the best interest of our country. And it proves that value of stepping up to deliver, not swiping from the sideline or picking sides. Thank you.
Thank you. And I call on Alexander Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm delighted to be able to close this debate on behalf of the Scottish Conservatives, and I will be supporting the amendment in the name of my colleague Stephen Kerr. Once again, today's debate could have been the opportunity to debate how best Scotland can exist in today's Europe. It was a chance to highlight opportunities for improved collaboration within the European Union and with our European neighbours as the United Kingdom and the European Union trading relationship continues to develop. However, one look at the Government's motion makes it quite clear, Presiding Officer, that this was the Scottish Government wanted to have a debate on other subjects and other areas. Indeed, the Scottish Government are rerunning debates on the single market membership, the customs union membership and the freedoms of movement. This is a shopping list that this Government knows is a complete fantasy. But that didn't stop them doing it, and it hasn't stopped them doing it. And they've had their opportunity this afternoon to stand up and say their piece, so it's important that we do the same. Instead of setting a pragmatic and bold vision for how Scotland can exist alongside the European Union, the Scottish Government wants to repeat an open wounds of old arguments going back as far as 2019 all over again. As usual, the Scottish Government is spending yet more chamber time debating entirely resolved matters. We should be talking in this chamber today about what's happening in our education system. We could be talking about what's happening with delayed projects with roads. We could be talking about what's happening in devolved matters, but that's not what we want to be. We want to be here focused on constitutional grievance. Happy to take an intervention.
Patrick Harvey.
Grateful. I just wonder if the member could explain how the argument he's making now is consistent with the fact that the Conservatives brought just yesterday a debate reopening an issue that was settled in 2019 as well, which is Scotland's net zero 2045 target, and brought an unrealistic wish list or shopping list of a nightmare fantasy of dumping net zero.
Alexander Stewart.
I thank Patrick Harvey for his intervention. But yesterday we were talking about the economy of Scotland and how jobs are being lost within a sector that's vitally important to this country and the future of our economic stability. That's what we discussed yesterday. So, as I said, we want to continually focus on constitutional grievance. Presiding Officer, the Scottish Government says it's concerned about economic damage, while ignoring the fact if Scottish independence came, we would have economic chaos. Absolutely. The Centre for Economic Performances at the London School of Economics has said disrupting trade with the rest of the United Kingdom could lower Scotland's income per capita by at least 6%. Given the Scottish exports to the rest of the UK are 3 times more than exports to the European Union, none of this is surprising. Nor is it surprising that, according to the Fraser of Allender Institute, over 500,000 jobs are linked to trade with the rest of the United Kingdom. The Scottish Government also wants to gloss over some of the problems about rejoining the European Union. They say it would be quite an easy thing to achieve. Well, as I say, they're glossing over many of the issues that they would have to face. Earlier this month, we saw the United Kingdom conclude a comprehensive trade deal with India. That is a real opportunity. This was a result for several years of negotiation. While the current UK government have been able to finalise that deal, it was the previous Conservative government that laid some of the foundations, to ensure that that agreement was achieved. And I know how hard that sector is fighting to ensure that the Scottish whisky industry is vitally important within that trade deal. I met the Indian Trade Minister 2 years ago when he said to me never had he seen a country fight so hard for one particular industry. And we've all been fighting for that industry because we know that industry will give us prosperity, it will give us opportunity and it will give us jobs within our communities. The deal that we have seen will reduce 150% tariffs on Scotch whisky down to 75%, and in further reduction of 40% within 10 years. And it could give us at least £1 billion of exports in the next 5 years. An extra £1 billion into our economy. We should be celebrating that. It also creates endless jobs and opportunities right across the sector. The Scottish Whisky Association has called the deal transformative and a landmark and transformational. And that is very much the case, Presiding Officer. However, the crucial bearings within that, the deal has the possibility for the UK to involve. And of course, I want to see more of that. And of course, we want to see trade deals in other areas. And we've seen that. It is, however, quite telling that the SNP government was unable to celebrate the deal, despite the significant possibilities and prospects that Scotland would receive. There are also many opportunities for Scotland in the future, and the United Kingdom emerges from faster-growing markets across Asia, across Africa and across the Americas. I hope that the Scottish Government can at least try to welcome some of the opportunities that lie ahead within these areas, because they are immense and give our opportunities for individuals and businesses to prosper. Presiding Officer, before concluding, I'd like to talk about some of the contributions that we've heard this afternoon. The Cabinet Secretary himself spoke about the Reset Summit that is to take place in the next week or so, and the challenges and the hopes and the aspirations and opportunity that we are there. But we have to think about the defence and security challenges that are there. And he talked about the new low for Labour with the comments made by the Prime Minister recently. My colleague Stephen Kerr gave what we would expect a passionate speech on this area when he talked about the idea of the SNP once again wanting to break up the United Kingdom. They want to rejoin the EU, they want to abandon processes, and they want to draw and drop the red lines that have been there. But the biggest issue he discussed was fishing rights and the access to these, and how they are being manipulated and processed in the last few days, and how we are hearing what might be being considered behind closed doors, and that would be a backward step for everybody here if that was being discussed. Taking back control has been touched on, and the whole idea that we've got so far 70 trade deals that have been signed. These are opportunities, Presiding Officer, that this country would not have had if we had still been a member of the EU. India's trade deal, as I say, is an absolute must and shows real prosperity for the nation and where we are. There's a whole idea of the secret summits and taking away fishing grounds and wrecking. And as we all know, the SNP and the Scottish Nationalists wish to continue to split and take away many of those. Neil Bibby talked about what's happening in the politics today, and he also touched on the reset that's about to take place, and the whole idea of the grandstanding that we've seen today by the Scottish Nationalists, and about the SNP's record when it comes to Europe. It's not always been that clear as to where they were. Alice Coe-Hamilton, and I pay tribute to him for discussing the Ukraine war and his recent visit with ambulances from Scotland that went to Ukraine. I think that's a very bold and as I say, I pay tribute to him for that. The freedoms that we enjoy in the United Kingdom, security issues, and that Scotland has a place in Europe. There's no doubt about that. And the talk about the reset and proposed plans, and wants to talk about where we work together. So, Presiding Officer, instead of being a meaningful debate today about Scotland's future relationships with Europe, today we have seen all talk and the idea of once again grievance and a lecture from many individuals within this chamber. We want to see a Scotland that is part of an outward-looking United Kingdom, where we can collaborate closely with the EU, while at the same time embracing the opportunities for free trade from the rest of the world. That is what we need and we want to create. That is what we need and we want to capitalise on. And that is what we need and we will stand up for. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. And I call on the Cabinet Secretary. A very generous 9 minutes, Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer, and very much appreciate the opportunity of summing up in this debate, and have listened to all the contributions closely, the constructive contributions and those less than constructive. But I will come back to the importance of the values that I think we share. Europe Day celebrates the common values that we do share right across Europe, those of human dignity, of freedom, of democracy, values based on the idea of unity, that a cooperative, interdependent Europe would never again suffer the horrors of war. 75 years ago, 80 since the end of the Second World War in Europe, Schumann's idea was the seed of a peace project that grew into what would become the European Union. But war and division has again returned to our continent. Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine and the ongoing conflict in Gaza reminds us that we cannot take peace and we cannot take international cooperation for granted. So, the European project and the ideas on which it is founded could not be more important today. The last years and the fast-moving 5 first months of this year have taught us anything, is that each individual country and region does not operate in a vacuum, and that long-standing certainties cannot be taken for granted. The reality is that we live in an ever more interconnected world, and international events in recent times have reminded us of the global dimension in which we are embedded. Let's be absolutely clear. Brexit has been a disaster for both Scotland and the United Kingdom. The impact has undermined the economy, made it harder for businesses to trade with the world's largest single market, ended free movement of people. No, I've got to finish. It's quite a long list, Mr Kerr, so I think it's important that we list it. End free movement of people, and has made it harder for those businesses to attract the people that need them to grow. With a trend towards a declining, ageing population, we need new Scots from Europe and the rest of the world who we will continue to welcome, to study, to work, to make their home here in Scotland. And that is why we call on the UK Government, that's why we call on other political parties as well, to reject the politics of populists that have sought to divide us, face reality, and seize the opportunity to repair some of the damage that Brexit has done. And those include, Mr Lumsden didn't speak in the debate, so I have very little time. I'll carry on with my comments. From a veterinary agreement, so we can more readily trade our world-class food and drink, to embracing the European Union's offer of a youth mobility treaty and rejoining Erasmus+, so that our young people can experience what other countries have to offer, and others to see everything Scotland can offer to them. But let's be... No, I haven't. If I have some time remaining, if I can make some progress, if I have some time remaining, I'll let Mr Kerr back in. I still haven't referred to his speech. I'm coming to that in a minute. But let's be under no illusion about that or anything else. No scheme or agreement can replace the benefits of European Union membership. And I continue to hope that the United Kingdom Government will rethink its position. Indeed, the forthcoming negotiations and the upcoming Leaders' Summit between the UK Government and the European Union on the 19th of May are a critical opportunity to undo some of the damage of the previous UK administration, and it's my sincere hope that the UK Government takes heed of Parliament's motion today. If I can reflect on the contributions made from Stephen Kerr and others. I'll begin with the contributions of Stephen Kerr and Neil Bibby, because in many respects they were the same. Both had so little to say about the European Union-UK summit and the fact that the UK Government has not shared documentation ahead of the discussions and may be prepared to make agreements in devolved areas without consent from devolved administrations. Both did not comment on them, and I'm happy to give way to either of them if they would wish to put their thoughts about that on the record. Happy to give way.
Stephen Kerr.
I'm grateful to the Cabinet Secretary. I made repeated reference to the UK-EU summit in London starting at the beginning of next week, so I don't understand why the Cabinet Secretary says we've made no mention of it. I certainly did, in connection with his own government's grievance-mongering, and also in terms of the Labour government's willingness to sell out on Brexit. But the point I wanted to make earlier, when he wouldn't give way, I'll make it now if I may very quickly, and that is, he is full of doom. He is full of doom and gloom about Brexit. Doom and gloom. He talks about the economy. Maybe he can explain to the Chamber why the rest of the European Union countries' economies performed worse than the United Kingdom in the years following Brexit. That is the economic fact.
Cabinet Secretary.
So, any reading of the record will show, as I pointed out, that neither Stephen Kerr then, or in his opening speech, or indeed Neil Bibby, made any reference to the fact that the UK Government has not shared documentation ahead of discussions and may be prepared to make agreements in devolved areas without consent from devolved administrations. This is a very important point, and it's a great shame that neither of the Tweedledum or Tweedledee parties who, in the previous UK Government,
Let's be courteous. Let's be courteous and let us stop shouting from our seats. Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To Patrick Harvey's contribution, he was absolutely right to talk about embracing the opportunities offered through the UK-EU summit, but quite rightly said it would only ameliorate some of the damage caused by Brexit. And he was absolutely right to say that he's not seeing a reset yet. The tone has changed, yes, but the actions of this Labour government and their predecessors, as I have evidenced in their lack of sharing documentation to devolved administration, is exactly the same custom and practice that we came used to from the previous UK government, and unfortunately we're seeing it now with the Labour Party as well. Alec Cole-Hamilton was absolutely right to talk about the prize, the opportunity of rejoining Erasmus Plus and indeed Creative Europe. Emma Roddick and Elena Whittam were right to stress why we need an ambitious reset in relations with the European Union, including freedom of movement. And I appreciate the speech of Paul Sweeney, who was right to talk about Europe being essential, condemned the damage of Euroscepticism, and in the context of the contemptible rhetoric of Keir Starmer said that he would not use such language. And I'm appreciative that a member on the Labour benches was prepared to say so. To Christine Graham, she talked about the importance of the international context, and she was right to do so. And George Adam was similarly correct to warn against the Farageism that is increasingly evident in both the Conservative Labour Party and Labour Party's rhetoric. Faisal Chowdhury talked about the advantages of European Union cooperation. I agreed with him. He talked about progress in the trade agreement with India. I think that was good. He didn't mention the UK-US trade agreement, which maintains the levels of tariffs which are damaging to the Scotch whisky industry. That was an oversight. And Alexander Stewart had an interesting theme. It was a could-have-been theme in his summing up. He could have taken the opportunity himself for the Conservative Party to stand up for the Scottish Parliament, for the Scottish Government and other devolved administrations in devolved areas like fishing, but they did not. We have 3 days ahead of the summit. The UK Government has not shared the documentation, and the Conservative Party couldn't even bring themselves to call for that to do so. I have little remaining time, so I'm summing up now. Any improved deal that the United Kingdom does with the European Union cannot ignore that Scotland voted to remain, nor can it replace what we have lost, namely the security and prosperity offered by membership of the European Union. That is why I continue to believe that Scotland should and must return to the European Union as an independent member state in its own right, because only by returning to its rightful place at the heart of Europe can Scotland enjoy the full benefits and make the fullest contribution to the European Union. I believe the light the EU was asked to leave on for Scotland burns still, and I believe it will continue to do so until the day of our return. In closing, I call upon Parliament to support the Scottish Government's motion and to commit to our fellow Europeans that Scotland and her peoples remain by their side. From Ukraine to the Atlantic, from the Nordics to the Mediterranean, Scotland will be steadfast in our efforts to work with Europe as friends until we return to take our place beside you all. As members of the European Union, we will continue to face together the challenges of our continent and our world faces. I move the motion in my name and oppose the opposition's amendments. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. And that concludes the debate on Scotland in today's Europe. It's now time to move on to the next item of business. And the next item of business is consideration of motion 15423 in the name of Paul Sweeney on appointment of the Patient Safety Commissioner for Scotland, and I call on Paul Sweeney to move and speak to the motion.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. As a member of the cross-party selection panel established by you under our standing orders, I am delighted to be speaking to the motion in my name to invite members of this Parliament to agree to nominate Karen Titchener to His Majesty the King for appointment as the inaugural Patient Safety Commissioner for Scotland. The cross-party selection panel was chaired by you, Presiding Officer, and the other members were Colin Beattie, the member for Midlothian North and Musselburgh, Emma Harper, member for South Scotland, Gillian Mackay, member for Central Scotland, and Brian Whittle, member for South Scotland. This is a new independent office holder who is established under the Patient Safety Commissioner for Scotland Act 2023 and will be supported by the Parliamentary Corporation. The Commissioner will advocate for systemic improvement in the safety of healthcare in Scotland and promote the importance of the views of patients and other members of the public in relation to the safety of healthcare. The Commissioner will conduct formal investigations into possible safety issues and gather, analyse and report on information from patients and members of the public about safety concerns. They will report their findings to the Scottish Parliament. Happy to give way.
Stephen Kerr.
I'm grateful to Paul Sweeney for giving way. Can I ask him, will this Commissioner's office be a safe haven for whistleblowers? Yep. Because that's an area where there are many areas of public interest that are raised by whistleblowers that are not being properly dealt with or even respected as things stand.
Paul Sweeney.
I thank the member for his intervention. I believe that their job is to look at systemic issues, but nonetheless whistleblowers will be an important factor in identifying issues of systemic nature which can be investigated and will possibly form a trigger for investigation. So I'm sure the Commissioner will exercise their judgment accordingly, and I would encourage any member of the public who has concerns, of course, to engage with the Commissioner. And I have to give way to the Minister. Yeah.
Cabinet Secretary.
Thank Paul Sweeney for giving way. Just to give reassurance to Stephen Kerr as to the very clear processes and pathways available to people within the health service to be able to whistleblow. Each board has its own whistleblowing champion, and there is a national whistleblowing officer that people can contact. And I have made very clear to boards my expectation of the culture of accepting whistleblowing in that term.
Paul Sweeney.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Commissioner's remit covers all healthcare providers operating in Scotland, including the National Health Service, NHS contracted and independent healthcare providers. The Commissioner will work collaboratively with other organisations to improve patient safety, adding value to the patient safety system in Scotland. The Commissioner's role is not to duplicate the work of existing organisations. They will take a macro-level view of patient safety in Scotland and seek to improve overall safety rather than address individual cases. Turning to our nominee, Karen Titchener, Karen has over 2 decades of senior leadership experience within the National Health Service and is widely recognised as a national and international authority in complex care delivered in the home, including acute hospital-level care, palliative care and end-of-life services. Karen has been working in the United States since 2017 and is currently serving as the Vice President of Hospital-at-Home Operations in Wisconsin. Karen's extensive experience across both the United Kingdom and international healthcare systems gives her a deep understanding of the challenges and opportunities in delivering safe, effective, person-centred care. The selection panel therefore believes that Karen's nursing background and her patient and safety-centred approach equip her well to undertake this new role, and I am sure that the Parliament will want to wish her well in her appointment. Presiding Officer, I move the motion in my name.
Thank you, Mr Sweeney. And the question on Point of order, Stephen Kerr.
I apologise, Presiding Officer. I should have indicated when I intervened to talk about whistleblowing that I am the Director of Whistleblowers UK, which is a not-for-profit organisation that advances the case for a change in the law in respect to protecting whistleblowers.
Thank you, Mr Kerr. Your comments are on the record. The questions on the motion we have just debated will be put at decision time, and there are 4 questions to be put as a result of today's business. Can I remind members that if the amendment in the name of Stephen Kerr is agreed to, the amendment in the name of Neil Bibby will fall. The first question is that Amendment 17539.4 in the name of Stephen Kerr, which seeks to amend motion 17539 in the name of Angus Robertson on Scotland in today's Europe, be agreed. Are we all agreed? The Parliament is not agreed, therefore we'll move to a vote, and there will be a short suspension to allow members to access digital voting.